Yo, I'm back to do another item review. This is the first one of these I've done in like months. I just kind of wasn't really feeling making the videos for a while, but the market shifted a lot since the last time I made one of these. Mainly, most items have gotten a lot cheaper, and there's also new items in the game. This is easily the most requested item that I've had over the last couple months come in terms of an item that needs an item review, and that is the Eye of Ayak, the staff, the wand that I'm holding here. The Eye of Ayak was released with the Doom boss back in July, and it's supposed to like its big reputation is as a like stepping stone weapon, like before Shadow. Like this is your big magic upgrade that you get before Shadow. That's definitely true. It's definitely a role that Eye of Ayak fills. But I think when it comes to people who are looking at purchasing an Eye of Ayak and they're not sure if they want to do it, are people who aren't really looking at like mega rares yet, obviously, but also aren't really looking at like strictly like just like an Eye of Ayak. Here's the let's look at the header here. So the Eye of Ayak, if you're not aware, is about 60 mil right now. So that's at a price point where when people are looking to buy this item, they're looking at it versus other items that are going to cost them a similar amount of money and seeing which one's a better upgrade. Like that's the vibe I've gotten from most people that I've talked to who have asked me about items that like what they should buy next, is that they're at a point where they're looking at like I don't know if I should buy a Bofa or if I should buy an Eye or if I should buy like a Void Waker, or if I should buy an Eye. Like it's items that are like of a similar price point because they have everything that's like a lot cheaper. They don't have all the stuff that's way more expensive yet, and they can't even consider that stuff yet. It's all that stuff that's around this price range that they're trying to weigh this item against. So that's the main like frame of reference that we're gonna take talking about this item. Is how does it stack up compared to like other items around this price point in terms of its usefulness? And one item we're gonna compare it to a lot in this video is gonna be the Bofa, because this is actually significantly cheaper than a Bofa, but it also fills like they have a lot of bosses where they compete against each other, and also like a lot of people. I feel like this weapon doesn't have the reputation. Like Bofa still has that reputation as like that weapon that you gotta get before you own any mega rares. Like it's gonna open up all the PVM for you. I feel like the Eye hasn't really gotten that reputation so much, but it deserves it. This item is really, really good, and it opens up a ton of bosses for you. I think you're gonna be surprised when we get into the use cases to see just how many bosses this weapon potentially opens up. So the Eye of Ayak is 60 mil as of November 2025. It is a main hand magic weapon primarily. It does also have a magic defense reduction spec, but that's not really like it's not used for that very often. There's almost no use cases where you bring this weapon specifically as a spec weapon. Most of the time when you use the defense reduction spec, it's because you're using an Eye of Ayak on that boss, and it's going to help the Eye do better. Like you're already using the Eye, and you're just going to spec with it because it's going to help the Eye do better. Like when you like bring this not to use it as a main hand, but specifically just to spec with it, there's like almost no bosses where you do that. Basically, it's kind of interesting how it turned out that way because it is a really interesting and like potentially good spec. There's just not that many like use cases where it really pans out. So, oop. Now let's go ahead and get into the use cases of the item. And I'll show a quick demonstration of how the item functions here. So it's a 3-tick wand. That makes it the fastest magic weapon in the game. And yeah, you see how fast this thing hits. And then it also is pretty strong. It's pretty strong. It hits for a 40 with no prayer on. Obviously, you'd have prayer on. It hits for a 42 max hit and max gear with a heart and prayer on. And then the spec's actually a 5-tick attack. I feel like most people don't realize that. It's actually slower. But yeah, it reduces magic defense. Not magic level, like most reduction weapons in the game, like that reduce defense level or magic level. This reduces their magic defense bonus, which is the first spec weapon in the game that actually reduces a defense bonus. And that's really interesting because defense bonus doesn't regenerate. It's what level gets multiplied by when you're like determining a roll, basically. So like a monster, you're gonna roll your attack level times your attack bonus, and you're gonna pick a number between 1 and whatever that number is randomly, and the monster is gonna like multiply multiply its defense level by its defense bonus, and then pick a number between 1 and that number randomly. And if yours is higher, you hit, basically. That's basically, like, in a nutshell, how the accuracy system works. And so, yeah, like, it's on the bonus part of that, which is the first time we've seen a weapon be over there. It's interesting because it gives it, like, kind of a different role, like a little bit of a different utility. But yeah, like I said, we're not going to talk about it mainly as a spec weapon. We're going to talk about it mainly as a main hand when we get into the use cases here, because that's mainly where it's like useful and used. So, whoa, what a long list. Tons of stuff here. And you see, the first thing I'll point out is that it's got plus more on both of these, like, sections. That's because I literally couldn't fit all the places where you can potentially get really good use out of an Eye of Ayak. Like, a very notable exception that's missing on this list is Phantom Muspa. If you're somebody who typically just runs Bofa and camps Bofa at Phantom Muspa, I'll show you. I got a ton of DPS calculations pulled up here that we're going to go through. Here's the Phantom Muspa one. On the melee phase, it's 52% better than Bofa Camp to bring an Eye of Ayak in budget gear as a switch. This is no Confliction Gauntlets, just Aram's top and bottom, a Virtus Mask, Occult, Mage K, pretty much all stuff that's very affordable versus like just a normal, like, regular Bofa. And yeah, 52% better. Obviously, it is terrible against the range phase. Really, really bad. But if against the melee phase as a switch, like, you should really be running mage range switch at Muspa. I mean, if you don't have access to a T-Bow or Shadow, it's really hard to run camp at Muspa. And even if you do have access to a T-Bow or Shadow, it's like still far, far superior DPS to bring a switch in pretty much all cases. But yeah, it's really good at Muspa, as it's really good at like pretty much anything that can be attacked with magic. So let's get into like the use cases that I really want to highlight though. So we're going to start by talking about it, assuming you don't have Confliction Gauntlets, because it actually interacts really interestingly with the Confliction Gauntlets. Now, this is a common misconception I've heard a lot of people say. They say, oh, the Eye is great, but you have to have Confliction Gauntlets for it to be good. That is not true. That is just flatly not true. This weapon as a magic weapon is extremely good at anything that's weak to magic with or without Confliction Gauntlets. The Confliction Gauntlets only make a huge difference at stuff that is, like, not weak to magic, but suddenly the Eye of Ayak does really well against it because the Confliction Gauntlet's accuracy special does, like, really, like, because it's a fast weapon, it really buffs the Eye of Ayak a lot to have that passive where if you miss, it rolls accuracy twice. Having that on a fast weapon is a lot better. And so since the Eye of Ayak is so fast, it obviously benefits from that a lot, which is probably where this misconception comes from. But, like, at all the things that are weak to magic, you don't need the Confliction Gauntlets for this to be a very, very good weapon. It's stuff like Bandos, Zami, Kree, which is stuff we're going to talk about later. Like, you're talking about using Eye of Ayak at those bosses. Yeah, if you have Confliction Gauntlets, yeah, that's stuff that's not weak to magic. And the Confliction Gauntlets just make it weak to Eye, basically. But we'll talk about that when we get there. We're getting ahead of ourselves. So let's start by talking about it without Confliction Gauntlets. We're going to assume you don't have Confliction Gauntlets for this first set of stuff. So we're going to talk about Akka. So Akka is the TOA boss, if you didn't know that. Bofa is like the weapon that I see a lot of people use on Akka just by default. Let's go ahead and pull up our DPS calculations here. So where's Akka? So here's Akka on a 300, salted, no defense production because you don't really ever reduce Akka's defense. It's a budget Eye, no Confliction Gauntlets versus like just a normal Bofa with just an Anguish and Assembler. So it beats the Bofa on Akka by about 3%, and that's like, you know, that's not a huge margin, but still it's better. It's better than your Bofa at Akka. So like, let's talk about P2 Warden. Now, obviously on P2 Warden, you have to use like magic and range separately, but we're just going to compare it. Like, think about how fast your Bofa takes down the range phase of P2. Well, the Eye of Ayak takes down, I don't think I have a calculation pulled up for this one, but the Eye of Ayak takes down the mage phase of P2 20% faster. So it's really, really good. It's only beaten by Shadow on the magic phase of P2. P3 Warden, you might think that, like, okay, it's a little bit tankier than Akka, but this weapon, if you do the magic reduction spec and just hit a 20 on P3 Warden, it is on par with Bofa at that point. I know I do have a calculation pulled up for this one, and that's right here. So this is P3 Warden. We've got 20 defense production spec from the Eye of Ayak here, and it's only 2% worse than the Bofa. And if we have Confliction Gauntlets, it's just flatly better by like quite a bit. But we're assuming for now that you don't have Confliction Gauntlets. It would almost be fair to say that you should assume that you have them, because if you can afford a Bofa, an Eye of Ayak plus Confliction Gauntlets is about the same price as a Bofa. So, but for now we're going to assume that you don't have the Confliction Gauntlets. Even without them, it still is on par with Bofa at Akka and P3 Warden, and at P2 Warden, when you're doing the Mage phase, it's like better than a Bofa is on the Range phase. So, like, I hear, like, there's a lot of people that, like, I've talked to that do a lot of TOA, and they're like, they don't know which one to go for. Like, they really just assume that they should go for Bofa first. I think it's really a toss-up these days. Now, the Eye is really bad on Zabak, so that's, like, worth mentioning for sure. But, like, the Eye is, like, honestly, like, it's just as good as a Bofa at TOA in like most places, and it's almost just as useful as a Bofa at TOA. So I think that it's not really just a P2 upgrade. If you don't have a Bofa yet and you can't afford one, then the Eye is probably the best weapon for you to look at to start getting into TOA more deeply. You could just take a crossbow into Zabak, for example, and deal with it that way, or an Atlatl. Atlatl's probably better. But yeah. So Whisperer, we're mainly focusing on stuff here where you don't need the Confliction Gauntlets for it to be good, again, because we're assuming you don't have them for this section. You don't need them at Whisperer. It's still the second best magic weapon at Whisperer without Confliction Gauntlets, just behind Shadow. Really, really good there. Beats Sang by a lot. Nightmare and Fasani's Nightmare, it is on par with Shadow as the best in slot magic weapon. So Shadow is like equally as good, but the Eye of Ayak is equally as good as a Shadow. It's just harder to upkeep because it's a 3-tick weapon. So most people prefer the Shadow because of that. But if you don't have a Shadow, which is like mostly who's concerned with this weapon, then obviously Nightmare and PNM, you know, it's best in slot there against the totems. Dagonoth Rex, it is flatly best in slot. It doesn't need Confliction Gauntlets there, obviously, because you hit him all the time. And the same with Nightmare Totems, you hit them all the time. So, it's best in slot. It's even better than Shadow on Dagonoth Rex. At Nilokaz and Theater of Blood, you just want strictly the fastest weapon you can get. And this being the fastest magic weapon in the game makes it best in slot at Nilokaz. Ulm Mage Claw, it is the second best weapon by a pretty significant margin. I do have a DPS calculation pulled up with that where I compare it with Sang Staff, so you can see just how much better it is. So we got Overload on, and then Prayers on. It is 15% better than a Sanguinesti staff and equivalent gear. That's a huge margin. Like that's massive. So yeah, it's way better than a Sang staff. And that's true for pretty much all these places. It's about 15% better than a Sang staff on these bosses. And so yeah, really good there. And that's without Confliction Gauntlets. Again, you don't need it for it to be good on Ulm Mage Claw or anything that's like naturally weak to magic, because it doesn't need the passive to hit, basically, because the stuff's weak to magic. The one thing I will say about Ulm Mage Claw is that if you're somebody who does like trio or team chambers a lot, and you like to be the melee hand guy, the Eye of Ayak cannot reach the Mage Claw from the melee side. So that's going to be a problem for you. You're going to need to bring like a Trident or a Sang Staff for the Mage Claw because you won't be able to reach it. But if you just if you take the Headrunner role, or if you're like soloing chambers, there's methods now where you don't have to switch attack styles to solo with an Eye of Ayak. Yeah, it's really good at Ulm. Now let's talk about these really interesting use cases where you do have Confliction Gauntlets, and it suddenly becomes like good at these bosses that aren't weak to magic, which is like kind of unexpected and weird, but it's true. So obviously it performs even better at all of these aforementioned places when you do add the Confliction Gauntlets. At Zulrah, it becomes better than a Shadow. It is best in slot, period, at Zulrah. It hits even better on the green phase. And it's a little bit worse than Shadow on the red phase, but you're mostly fighting the green phase, and it's like better by a bigger margin on the green phase. So overall, it's better than a Shadow at Zulrah. So that's crazy. It's best in slot, period. Now, Bandos, Zami, and Kree. 3 God Wars dungeon bosses. At all of these places, it is either on par with Bofa or slightly better than a Bofa if you have Confliction Gauntlets, which is kind of crazy, but it's true. I'll show you the DPS calculations. So we've got General Grardor here. The Eye of Ayak with Confliction Gauntlets, but still in mostly budget gear, comes in at only 2.5% worse than a Boa Ferdinand. I'd say it's basically on par, especially considering you could like lay down a 20 spec, and suddenly it's better by about 2%. And so yeah, it's really good at General Gardor if you have the gauntlets. Here's Kriara, where it beats Boa Ferdinand by about 1% if you have Confliction Gauntlets. Kree is super, super tanky, so having that passive helps a lot. Both of these weapons still struggle to hit. But yeah, it still does a really good, it does like a good job compared to a weapon that a lot of people do take into like Team Armadil because it's just the best thing that they've got that can try to hit it. And then Krill, a lot of people take Bofa into Krill. The Eye of Ayak, if you have Confliction Gauntlets, is even better than a Bofa at Krill by about 3.5%. So that's pretty crazy as well. So yeah, at these God Wars dungeon bosses, if you have Confliction Gauntlets, it's actually a really good and serviceable weapon. Not really at Saradomin. It's like 15% worse than a Bofa at Saradomin, because Sarah is just ridiculously, ridiculously tanky, and has a super high magic level, so it doesn't really do as well there. But at these three, it does really well. Now, there's a guy called Reynolds, Reynolds. You can look up his channel and his video on Mage Tank Inferno. It's basically a way you can try to cheese Inferno using an Eye of Ayak and like full melee armor and the Confliction Gauntlets. It's an interesting strategy that's apparently like kind of viable for people trying to get their first cape. So if you're looking to maybe potentially cheese Inferno, you could check out his video and see if that's something that might be interesting to you. Vespula Portal in Chambers of Zarek, a notoriously tanky enemy that you have to take out. This weapon with Confliction Gauntlets and budget gear is on par with a Max Tebow, which makes it second best after Shadow for the Abyssal Portal in Vespula's room. I think I have a calculation pulled up for that. Yeah, I show it versus a Bofa here, which a lot of people do use against Vespula Portal because it does decently compared to most weapons, but the Eye of Ayak with Confliction Gauntlets is 17% better than that weapon on the Abyssal Portal. So yeah, and it does reach the Abyssal Portal. It attacks so quickly that you can't really go back and forth with the safe spot, but you won't have to step in close and get meleeed by Vespula, so you just stand there kind of like 4 tiles out of the safe spot. You just stand there and attack the portal and then run to the safe spot if your redemption goes off, get your redemption back on, and then go back out and just continue to attack it from the safe spot. It's just, you just stand there and hit it, basically. But you still don't get meleeed by Vespula, so redemption strats still work. It's viable to use on the Vespula portal, and it is significantly better than a Bofa. And then Skeletal Mystics, it is on par with a Bofa at Skeletal Mystics. There's obviously a few other rooms at Chambers where you use magic, like Tightrope. It's on par with a Bofa on both sides of Tightrope, so it's really good at Tightrope as well. And then on Baby Muttadile, you obviously use magic against Baby Muttadile. It's about 15% better than a Sang Staff on Baby Muttadile. So yeah, that's why I say plus more, because there's like even more use cases that I didn't have room to list here. But yeah, this is like just an example. There's just several examples, a lot of examples, but just to show you an illustration of how much of the game Eye of Ayak really can like open up for you and make viable. It's a really good weapon, and something that for 60 mil I think is a steal for people that are like earlier in the game and don't have like a huge bank yet. If you're somebody who has a max bank, you will want an Eye of Ayak for Nilokaz, if you specifically, because it is the best in slot weapon there, and potentially Zulra, but especially at Nilokaz because it makes a big difference there. And then other than that, it's like something you won't use very much if you have like a max bank, but you will still own it because you need it for Nilokaz and Theater of Blood. But if you're somebody who's like building up their bank and like progressing, this is a really good weapon. It's going to open up a lot of the game for you, and I think is definitely something that you should consider buying. Obviously, you know, everyone's situation is different. It might not be the right call for you. You should think about that and consider your options and what type of content you like to do. But yeah, it's definitely got its appeal. A lot of places where it's good, and for 60 mil, I think is a very, very good item. So that is my take on the Eye of Ayak. I hope it was helpful to you. We'll see you.